Light rain fell on the huge, green fields of Brooklyn, New York's Greenwood Cemetery. A place where quiet held the weight of many stories that were not spoken. William David, a man in his late 50s, got out of his sleek black sedan and walked toward a familiar gravestone. His shiny shoes crunched on the wet dirt as he went. On this exact date, October 12th, he came here every year to remember the only woman he had ever loved. He held a bunch of white lilies in his steady, old hands. Favorite of Elena, each time he visited this grave, it reminded him of what he had lost and the choices that had made his life so lonely. David was a powerful and wealthy real estate tycoon who had built a kingdom from nothing. His name was all over New York City. It was in business magazines and on huge billboards advertising his newest high-end apartment buildings. He had everything a man could want. A lot of money and a lifestyle that many people wish they had, but during these peaceful moments at the graveyard, none of that mattered. He wasn't the cruel businessman or the smart investor. He was just a sad man who had once loved someone so deeply that time couldn't erase their memory. Elena was the only softness in his harsh world. It had been decades since they last saw each other. He was a young man in Manhattan trying to make it in the world. She worked at a small art store in Soho. Her eyes were always dreamy, and her heart was always open to love. Elena, unlike David, who was obsessed with goals, thought that life was made up of small, beautiful events. She would take him to parks and make him walk the Brooklyn Bridge for hours on end to show him that life was more than just business. She had been his light and stabilizer until one day she was nowhere to be found. David had tried to find her everywhere and with everyone, but Elena had vanished like a whisper in the wind. He thought for years that he might have done something to make her leave. The questions had been following him around like ghosts in the back of his thoughts. Then, 5 years ago, he found her in this cemetery, not alive but dead. He got there too late and learned that she had died of an illness, leaving behind no reason or closure but her name on a gravestone. He bent down over her grave and put the lilies gently on the ground. "It's been 5 years, Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the leaves moving. "And I still don't know the answers." The cold stone with her name carved into it hurt his fingers like a wound that would never heal. He closed his eyes, letting the memories come back, her laughs, her scent, the way she had made his world feel less empty. He looked away when he saw a sudden movement. He wasn't alone. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood a few feet away with his hands in the pockets of his worn-out leather jacket. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and a thin build that suggested hardship rather than wealth. As he stared at the same grave, his face couldn't be read. It was a mix of sadness and doubt. David was on his knees before David frowned. He had never seen anyone else visit Elena's grave, so he thought she didn't have any family or friends left who remembered her. But this young man wasn't just walking by. There was something about the way he looked at the grave that told me he was paying attention. "There is something very personal." David slowly got to his feet and looked at the stranger with sharp eyes. "Did you know her?" he asked in a steady but interested voice. The young man moved around a little, as if he wasn't sure if he should answer. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice rough but strangely familiar. "She was my mom." David's heart stopped for a second. He could barely make out the world around him. The trees, gravestones, and rain are all becoming less clear. He looked at the boy to make sure this wasn't some cruel trick of the world. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice was almost a whisper as he said. The young man let out a sharp breath and ran his hand through his wet hair. He looked at David again and said, "Elena Whitman was my mother. If what she told me is true, then you're my father." David could feel the ground move under him, as if the earth had split open. He was hit with the words, "You had a son he never knew existed, a son Elena had kept from him all these years." They crushed every belief he had held. He took short, sharp breaths as his mind raced through 1,000 questions. But only one came out. Why didn't she tell me?" The young man, who was his son, smiled in a way that showed years of unresolved pain. "I guess that's something you'll have to figure out," he said. Then he turned around and walked away, disappearing into the misty rain. David stood alone in front of Elena's grave, more lost than he had ever been in his life. Before you go to the next video, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. David stood still, and the sound of the rain turned into a low rumble in the distance. He could still hear the young man's words in his head. Every word cut him like a blade. She was my mother. You're my father. He tried to understand how real it was, but it felt like a dream that was slipping away from him. He turned away from his own son, who was standing right in front of him. He put his shaking hand on Elena's gravestone to support himself because his legs felt weak. Why had she kept this from him? Why had she let him live all these years thinking she had just vanished? He gasped for air as he turned around and looked around the cemetery for the young man. But he was gone, lost in the trees and the gray fog that was coming over Brooklyn. David felt anxious for the first time in years, something he hadn't let himself feel before. For all of his life, he had been in charge of everything and nothing had ever caught him off guard. Yet, he stood there helpless in the rain. He had to find him. He couldn't just let him go. He needed to know what happened. He rushed to the entrance of the cemetery, his eyes moving from side to side to look for trace of the boy. He was scared when he saw a lone figure walking away with their shoulders hunched against the cold on the main road. Without giving it much thought, David yelled, breaking the evening quiet. Wait! The young man stopped but didn't turn around. David took a deep breath as he closed the gap between them. His heart was beating fast. When he got to him, he wasn't sure what to say. Please don't walk away, I need to understand. The young guy slowly turned, but his dark eyes couldn't be read. At close range, David could barely tell the difference between them. The shape of his jaw and the sharpness of his eyes told him it. He wasn't ready for how it made him feel. But the boy didn't seem at all impressed. Know what? His voice was filled with a quiet anger that you didn't know I existed. That my mom raised me by herself while you built your business. David jerked back. He had always been proud of being a man who told the truth. But this was a truth he wasn't ready for. I swear I didn't know. He said it in a somber voice. I never heard from her. He looked at the boy's face for signs that he believed him, but all he saw was quiet doubt. What's your name? It dawned on David that he didn't know the most basic fact about his own son. Pause. The boy hesitantly replied, Nathan. Nathan, it was like the name had been waiting for him in a deep part of his soul for years, even though he had never heard it before. David sucked down the lump in his throat. Nathan, I need to know why Elena didn't tell me or why she kept you from me. Tell me about her. Nathan shook his head and let out a dry laugh. You want me to tell you about her? He asked the woman. Where were you when she was sick, having trouble paying the rent, and working 2 shifts to keep us going? Have you thought about how many nights she cried herself to sleep wondering if she made the right choice? David felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He had spent years mourning Elena, believing she had chosen to leave him, never thinking that she had been suffering. The thought of her suffering while he lived in penthouses and signed multi-million-dollar deals made him sick. To his stomach, I didn't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. If I had, I would have. Nathan cut him off. You would have what shown up like some hero and fixed everything with your money. His eyes burned with anger. That's the difference between us. You think money fixes everything, but she didn't need your money, she needed you, and you weren't there. David felt the weight of those words settled deep in his chest. He had no defense, no justification, only the harsh truth that he had failed Elena without even knowing it. You're right, he admitted, his voice. I wasn't there, and I can't change that, but I want to know you, Nathan. If there's even a chance to make things right, I'll take it. Nathan looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, with a sigh, he looked away. It's too late. He mumbled, she's gone, and you're just a stranger. He turned and walked away, fading into the city's endless streets. David did nothing as he watched his son run off into the night. He felt more lost than he ever had before. Before you go to the next video, please subscribe to our channel. Share and like this page. David was in his Fifth Avenue penthouse apartment and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the endless city lights. New York had always been his kingdom. It was where he thrived and where every deal, building, and financial win was like another trophy for him. But tonight the city felt cold in a way that I wasn't used to. The guy who looked like him in the glass was a stranger. He had everything and nothing at the same time. Nathan's words kept playing over and over in his mind. each one more painful than the last. She didn't need your money. She needed you. He had thought for years that Elena had left him, but in fact she had been raising his son alone and causing him unimaginable pain. He felt sick to his stomach thinking about how she would have to work double shifts to pay the rent while he built his business. How did he not know? How did he never feel in his heart that a part of him had been growing up without him? His mind went back to the graveyard and the first time he saw Nathan. He didn't need a DNA test to be sure. He could tell from the boy's eyes and the way his face was shaped. Nathan was David's son. There was no question, but Nathan had already left, leaving David with more problems than answers. He couldn't let it end this way. He had spent his whole life making sure things went his way. He had to find Nathan again. He had to get it. Reaching for his phone, he called the number of the one person he knew could help Robert Vega, a lawyer he had worked with before. Within minutes, Robert answered the phone in a cool and professional way. "Mr. Whitman," David thought for a moment before answering. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to find someone." Nathan is the name of a young guy. I don't know his last name. His mother was Elena Whitman. Robert spoke again after a pause on the other end. "I'll see what I can do." The next day, David buried himself in work, trying to distract himself from the storm inside his head. Meetings, contracts, financial reports, none of it held the same meaning it once did. His success didn't feel heavy for the first time in years. He worked his whole life to get rich, but what was the point if the one thing that really mattered was gone? By the time his phone broke in the evening, "Robert was the one I found." What the inspector said was Nathan Whitman, who is 23 years old, lives in a small apartment in Queens near Atoria Park, and works at a shop on Steinway Street. David let out a breath as he gripped the edge of his desk. "Please send me the address." That night, he was stopped in front of a Queens apartment building that looked really bad. It was very different from the fancy Manhattan, and he never imagined his child growing up there. The stairs were rusty, and the paint was coming off the walls. He thought for a moment before getting out of his car. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. He had finished billion-dollar deals with mean competitors, but he was more nervous than ever before when he stood in front of this door and was about to talk to his own son. He rang twice. The door opened just a bit, showing Nathan's wary face. As soon as he saw David, he got angry and asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" This is what David said. "I just want to talk." Nathan laughed and shook his head. "You don't give up, do you?" David said, "No, not when something matters." Nathan didn't move for a long time. Then, with a sigh of regret, he moved out of the way to let David in. The apartment was small and crowded with old, broken-down furniture and drawings and plans on the walls. David's eyes darted to them as he recognized the intricate mechanical plans. "You're an engineer?" he asked. Nathan shrugged. Nathan was working at the yard to pay for part-time classes at City College of New York. David felt guilty again. David had so much money that he could never spend it all, while his son worked to pay for school. He sucked his throat. "I didn't come here to judge your life. I just need to understand. Why didn't you tell me?" Nathan leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. "Because she didn't want to be your help person. You had your empire first. She knew that. She didn't want to force you to do something you didn't want to." David's chest got tight. He said in a voice just above a whisper, "But I would have chosen. I would have been there." Nathan laughed in a dry way. David clenched his jaw and asked, would you have written a check and moved on?" He had never felt so helpless in all his life. "I can't change the past," he thought. "Nathan, but I can come here right now if you let me." Nathan looked at him for a long time, but his face couldn't be read. He then turned away with a sigh. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said, "but I guess we'll see." David had a brief moment of hope. It wasn't forgiveness, even though it wasn't acceptance, it was a start. Before you go to the next video, please subscribe to our channel. Share and like with your friends. David sat across from Nathan in the small apartment and felt like he didn't belong in his son's world. The heavy silence between them was caused by the years, though. Wanted to say something to break the ice, but he had never been good at showing how he felt. He was good at business talks and arguments in the boardroom. However, this was uncharted land. Nathan, on the other hand, leaned against the bar with his arms crossed and his eyes sharply focused on David, as if he were trying to decide if he could be trusted. David saw the detailed mechanical designs, plans, and engineering drafts that were stuck to the walls. They weren't just random sketches. They were precise, exact, and full of math. He picked out one of them. He asked, "Did you design this?" with real interest. Nathan thought for a moment and then said, "Yeah, it's for a school project I've been working on." David took a better look at the drawing and said, "This is impressive. You're really good." Nathan made fun of her and said, "Thanks, but talent doesn't pay tuition." David felt guilty again. His son had been working hard to pay for college while he was living in style and not knowing about him. He really wanted to help fix things, but he knew that money wouldn't change the past. "What's your goal? What do you want to do after graduation?" David asked in a quiet voice. Before replying, Nathan looked at him for a moment. "I want to work in automotive engineering, designing more efficient engines, maybe even start my own company someday." David nodded, and he felt a strange sense of pride. "That's a good plan. You might want to think about jobs." Nathan laughed in a dry way. "Linking up, it's hard for me to study between jobs because I don't have a lot of people waiting to give me chances." David was unsure. He wanted to help, but he didn't want to go too far. "If you ever need help, I know a few people in the business who I could call." Nathan's face turned dark. "I don't need handouts," he said. "Don't give it out." David made it clear help is there. The kind of father Nathan should have. Nathan flinched at the word father, and David felt bad right away for saying it so soon. He knew it would take time to build trust. "Look, I'm not here to force myself into your life," he said, "but I lost so much time already. I don't want to waste whatever chance I have left." Nathan sighed and ran his hand over his face. "It's not that easy," he said. "I know." David said, "Yes, but let's start small. A meal and a chat, no plans, just getting to know each other." Nathan thought about it for a long time before finally nodding. "Fine, one meal, that's it." David felt a lot of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. He was used to going to fancy restaurants where waiters knew his name and champagne flowed easily, but the next night they met at a small diner near Nathan's apartment. It wasn't the kind of place David was used to, but as they sat across from each other, David realized that this place was perfect for Nathan. It was really simple, just like him. They ordered their food, and then there was quiet between them for a while. Nathan then slowly began to talk about his work, studies, and other things he was really interested in. Nathan didn't say anything deeply personal, but David paid close attention to every word. David felt a glimmer of hope that maybe he could get a place in Nathan's life for the first time. When they were done eating, David reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I meant what I said about helping you," he said, sliding it across the table. "No pressure. Just if you ever need advice or an opportunity, this is my direct line." Nathan thought for a moment before putting the card in his wallet without saying a word. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. The cool night air surrounded them as they walked outside. Nathan stuffed his hands deep into his pants. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "But thanks for dinner," David said with a nod, one step at a time. Nathan gave him a long look and then a small nod. Then he turned around and left without saying anything else. David felt a lot of different feelings as he watched him leave. He didn't know where this path would lead, but it was the first time in a long time that he felt like he had something important to fight for. Please subscribe to our station before moving on. Share and like with your friends. David was always a man who did things. He had made decisions in the past with the confidence that comes from having done things many times. He was used to being in charge and knowing what would happen next. But in this new part of his life with Nathan, he felt like he was going where no one had gone before. They hadn't talked much since their dinner at the diner weeks ago, but David couldn't shake the feeling that things were slowly beginning to change. Nathan hadn't called, but he hadn't cut David off either. The silence between them felt less awkward now, like they were both honoring a quiet truce. Even though it was fragile, David had done everything he could to keep their relationship alive without making Nathan feel too much. He sent Nathan a few texts every once in a while to check in, but he never tried to push too hard. Nathan would sometimes reply. The texts were short but polite. They only talked about school and work and didn't talk about the past. There was no sign of a deeper link. David kept holding on to those little signs, though. Because Nathan had made it clear in their first conversation that he wasn't interested in charity, David knew it would take time to show Nathan that he wasn't just another rich man trying to buy his way into his life. David respected Nathan's wishes and didn't want to buy Nathan's love. He just wanted a chance to earn it. Nathan finally got in touch on a Saturday afternoon. David's heart skipped a beat when he saw the name on the screen of his phone. Nathan called with a simple message. "You free to grab drinks?" David didn't think twice. He answered right away. Of course, when and where they decided to meet, Nathan said it would be one of his favorite Brooklyn coffee shops. The coffee shop was small and independent on Court Street, tucked between old brick buildings. The barista knew every customer's name. David got there early, his nerves tense with excitement. This could be his first real chance to build something with his son. As soon as Nathan walked in, David noticed how much he looked like Elena. Not only did the way he walked make him stand out, but so did the way his eyes sparkled when he was focused. For a split second, David had to do everything he had not to let his feelings take over. But he quickly put those feelings aside because Nathan was there, and that was all that counted. They greeted each other, and Nathan led David to a table in the corner by the window. The place was peaceful, and you could see the busy street outside. In the background, you could hear the noise of Brooklyn during the day. Nathan ordered a coffee black just like his mother used to take it, and David followed suit. They sat down, and for the first time in weeks, David felt the weight of the silence between them ease a little. So Nathan began breaking the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night." David nodded, unsure of where this talk was going. "What part? You know, about wanting to get to know me, wanting to be active? I've been a jerk about it, haven't I?" Nathan asked as he sipped his coffee. David almost didn't believe what he was hearing. Nathan was saying sorry. He wasn't ready for, "No, you haven't been a jerk." David spoke in a calm voice. "You've been honest, and I value that." As Nathan looked down at his cup and nervously tapped his fingers on the ceramic, he said, "I guess I just don't know what to make of all this. I've spent my whole life thinking I was alone in this, and now you're telling me that you've been out there the whole time living a completely different life." David felt the weight of those words sink in. He had never realized how much Nathan missed him until he heard them and saw the hurt in Nathan's eyes. "I can't change what happened," he said. "Nathan, but I can be here right now if you let me." Nathan didn't answer right away. He seemed lost in thought, his look drifting to the street outside. "I don't know if I can just forget everything," he said quietly. "I've built my life without you. I've learned to rely on myself, and it's not easy just to let someone in." David understood he had built his life around achievements and acquisitions, but none of that mattered now. None of it could replace the relationship he had never had with his son. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to be part of your life. No strings attached, no plans, just us working this out together." Nathan met his look, then his expression softening for the first time. "I'm still pissed about a lot of things, about how everything went down, but I'm also interested, and I guess that's something, right?" David smiled, feeling a sense of relief he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "That's more than enough for me." For the next hour, they talked slowly. The walls began to come down. They talked everything: school, Nathan's hopes for the future, even the awkwardness of their first meeting. David told Nathan about his work, his life, but he made sure to listen more than he spoke. He knew this wasn't just about him, this was about Nathan and about the time they had lost. As they stood to leave, Nathan shocked him. "You know," he said, "maybe we could do this again, get some coffee." He broke off and said, "Maybe we could try one step at a time, right? I don't know about being a family or anything." David felt better, and he gave himself hope for the first time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Before you go to the next video, please like and share our channel with your friends. David looked at his phone more often than normal, hoping to get a message that might not come. Since they met at the coffee shop, there was a change in the way Nathan saw him. Even though the door wasn't open yet, it wasn't locked either. Nathan hadn't called or texted David in a few days, and David didn't want to bother him. He knew it would take patience, which he had a lot of in business, but never so much in his personal life. Then, late one night, as he sat in his penthouse with a view of the New York skyline, his phone rang. He quickly picked it up, and Nathan's name made his heart skip a beat. The message was simple. "Hey, you busy?" David replied right away. Nathan said, "What's up?" and didn't answer for a few minutes. "Just thinking you free to talk." David felt a rush of relief. It's possible that this was improvement. "You can call at any time." Soon after, David's phone rang. On the first ring, it was "Hey Nathan." On the other end, there was a short quiet. Nathan then let out a sigh, as if he had been thinking about whether or not to make the call. "Hey," he finally said, "it looks like I just need to ask you something." David said in a calm voice, "Go ahead." "I was wondering about my mom." Nathan said with hesitation, "You told me a little about how you met her, but I never got to hear your whole story." David's chest got tight. He had tried for years to forget about the past, but with Nathan on the line, he knew he needed to remember. He spoke slowly and carefully. "Your mother was amazing. We met in college in Boston, where she was studying journalism and I was drowning in finance classes. I was so focused on my career goals that I barely noticed the world around me, but your mom made sure people noticed her, not because she was loud, but because she had this energy about her that made everyone feel like they belonged there." After a short pause, Nathan said, "That sounds like her." David smiled, but it was sad. She made life seem bigger than it was, and she believed in people. She used to tell me that success wasn't just about making money, it was about making a difference. But I was too young and focused on my goals at the time to really understand what she meant. "What happened?" Nathan asked, with a softer voice this time. David sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I got a job offer in New York right after graduation. It was everything I ever wanted," he said. "A job at one of the best companies is a quick way to get ahead. Your mom really wanted to stay in Boston for a little while longer to finish a job. We promised to make it work from far away, but I was selfish and young, so I put my career ahead of everything else." Nathan didn't say anything for a while, and David thought he might have said too much. But Nathan then spoke up again. "She never really talked about you much," he said. "I mean, I always knew who you were, but she didn't say much about what happened. I guess I always assumed you just left and never looked back." David forced the lump in his throat to go away. "I didn't want to leave her," he said. "It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I promised myself I'd come back for her and that we could pick up where we left off once I had a job. But life doesn't work that way." It had been a while since I had seen her, and I had lost a lot. Nathan took a deep breath and said, "Yeah, she was gone." David felt the weight of those words. "I'm sorry, Nathan." Every day there was more quiet between them, but it wasn't as tense as it used to be. That kind of quiet that happens when two people finally understand each other was broken when Nathan spoke again. "I think I want to know more," he said. "Not just about her, about you, about everything." David's heart swelled. "I would like that," he said honestly. Nathan thought for a moment and then said, "But it has to be on my terms. No pressure, no expectations." David agreed, "Of course. When you're ready." There was a short pause, and Nathan then said something that caught David by surprise. "Do you think she would have liked us to get to know each other?" It was hard for David to speak. "I know she would," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Your mother always believed in second chances." Nathan didn't say anything at first, but when he did, his voice was lighter and more thoughtful. "Maybe we could meet again soon just to talk." A rush of hope hit David, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. "I'd like that," he said happily. David sat back and looked out at the city lights as the call finished. It had been years since he felt something change inside him. He had spent so much time running away from his mistakes, but maybe it wasn't too late to make things right. Before you go to the next video, please like and share our channel with your friends. David got to the Brooklyn coffee shop early where he and Nathan had agreed to meet. He picked a table by the window and put his hands together to calm down. It had been a long time since he had felt this excited, this mix of hope and worry. He thought the first meeting would go worse than it did. But now came the real test. David had to show Nathan that he was serious about being in his life. The doorbell rang, and David looked up to see Nathan walking. Nathan's stance was a little tense, but he didn't stutter. That alone made David feel better. As soon as Nathan saw him, he walked over and slid into the seat next to him. "Thanks for coming," David said, looking at his son's face carefully to see if there were any signs of how he was feeling. Nathan gave a sigh. David decided not to push too hard and nodded. He thought it wouldn't hurt to talk. When the waitress came by, they both asked for coffee. There was silence for a moment before Nathan spoke again. The question, "So what exactly do you do?" caught David off guard, but he was happy to answer it. "I'm in charge of an investment firm. We help businesses grow and take care of portfolios." Nathan gave a small smirk. "In other words, you make rich people even richer." David laughed because he liked the dry humor. That is one way to say it. Nathan drank some coffee and said, "I don't really know anything about money. My mom liked writing more than anything else, and I guess I got that from her. I'm now studying media at NYU." David's eyes got bigger. "Journalism, that's amazing. Your mother would be so happy." Nathan shifted in his seat. "Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm any good at it, but I like it. You must be good if you got into NYU," David pointed out. Nathan hesitated, then admitted, "I actually got a scholarship. Mom always wanted me to do what I loved, but college wasn't cheap, and I had to work for it." David felt bad because he had so much money, but his son had been having a hard time in school. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was low now. "Of course you didn't," Nathan said, though there was no anger in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. David exhaled, understanding just how much he had missed. "I know I can't change the past, Nathan, but I want to be part of your future if you'll let me." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it held the answers he was looking for. "I don't know what that looks like," he admitted. "Neither do I," David said. "Honestly, we can figure it out, though. There's no rush or expectation, just one talk at a time." Nathan looked at him and then up at him again. It was the first time David thought he saw something other than walls. "Okay," Nathan finally said. "One conversation at a time," David said with a smile. He felt warm in a way he hadn't in years. After that, they talked for more than an hour about small things, movies, and books they liked. Nathan was reading through David's crazy work plan. Not always easy, and Nathan seemed uncertain, like he was afraid of letting down his guard too much. But David didn't mind. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. It takes time to build a relationship. Nathan put his hands in his jacket pockets as they left the cafe. "I need to leave. I have a paper due tomorrow." He said, "Of course, but maybe we can do this again sometime." Nathan thought about it for a second before nodding. "I think that would make David feel better." Nathan gave him a small nod and then walked off into the busy streets of Brooklyn. David felt something he hadn't felt in years as he watched Nathan walk away. Wishes before you go to the next video, please subscribe to our channel. Like and tell your friends. In the days that followed, David couldn't stop thinking about Nathan. The coffee shop talk went better than he had hoped, but he knew it was only the start of a long journey. He did not want to be too pushy, but he also did not want too much time to go by between talks. He hadn't been there for his son for 20 years already, and he wasn't going to miss any more. He sent Nathan a text after a few days. "I hope your paper went well. Let me know if you want to meet up for coffee again." He didn't think he would hear back right away, but to his relief, his phone rang a few minutes later. "Everything went well. I like coffee." David may have felt a rush of relief this weekend and quickly typed back, "Sounds great. Tell me when and where." They met again in Manhattan at a different coffee shop. And this time it was one closer to Nathan's school. Nathan seemed a little less tense, but he was still cautious. Again, they talked about easy things. David asked Nathan about his classes, and Nathan asked David a few questions about his work. It wasn't a perfect time for the two to bond, but David was glad for it. Nathan paused for a moment before asking, "Why did you and my mom break up?" It was the first time he had asked something personal that went beyond the surface, and David knew he had to be honest. He let out a sigh and ran his hand through his hair. "We were young," he said. "I met her when I was just starting out in my career. She was very smart, passionate, and full of life, but I got too busy with work. I kept telling her that things would slow down and I'd have more time for us, but it never happened. She got tired of waiting in the end." Nathan was quiet for a moment and then asked, "Did you ever try to find her?" David's voice got rough, and I did too. "We broke up a few years ago. When I understood how much I had lost, she had already moved to Chicago, and I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had," he lost his train of thought and couldn't finish the statement. Nathan looked down at his coffee and thought about this. He agreed. "She didn't talk much about you. I knew your name, but she never made you sound like a bad guy." Someone who wasn't there. David forced a sob from his throat and said softly, "Every day I regret it. I should have done more. I should have fought harder to be in her life. And if I had known about you." He shook his head and said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." Nathan, I want you to know that Nathan looked at him for a long time and then let out a sigh. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he said. "You don't have to do anything," David said, "one step at a time." "Don't push." Nathan gave a slow nod. It was fine for them to sit there in quiet for a while after that. It felt like making progress. David and Nathan walked a few blocks together after they left the cafe before they went their separate ways. Nathan was about to leave when he stopped and said, "Hey, thanks for reaching out." David smiled and said, "Thanks for the chance." David felt something change inside him as he watched Nathan blend into the crowd. It was the first time in years that he felt like he was moving forward instead of looking back. He still had a long way to go, but at least he wasn't taking that path by himself. Before you go to the next video, please like and share our channel with your friends. David didn't remember the last time something other than work made him feel this stressed. Over the past few weeks, he and Nathan had met a few more times, and each time things were a little less tense and more easy. Perhaps not quite close yet, but at least Nathan's wall was starting to break down. Today, though, was different. Nathan was being invited to David's house for the first time today. It wasn't a big deal, just dinner, but it felt important. He had spent all day getting ready and making sure everything was just right. He wasn't much of a cook, but he hired a chef to make a meal because he wanted to impress them without spending too much. When the doorbell rang, he took a deep breath and opened it. Nathan stood there, looking a little uneasy but not scared enough to back out. He was wearing a casual hoodie and jeans, which stood out against David's pressed shirt and slacks, but David didn't care. He was just glad Nathan had shown up. "Hi," David welcomed Nathan and moved out of the way to let him in. Nathan took a quick look around the modern but warmly decorated penthouse with a view of Central Park as he walked in. He said, "This place is nice," and David could hear what he was really thinking. "This place is massive." David smiled and said, "Thanks. Feel free to stay." Nathan walked in further and looked at the expensive furniture, paintings on the walls, and floors that were smooth. "So this is what investment firms get you, huh?" he asked with a smirk. David laughed. "Something like that, but really, none of this matters if you don't have someone to share it with." He wasn't trying to be serious, but Nathan seemed to pick up on it. "Well, you've got me here now," Nathan said, his tone light but his words serious. David's chest got a little tighter. Yes, they did. They went to the dining room, where the table was already set. The food was presented beautifully. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Did you make everything?" David laughed and said, "I wish I had some help." Nathan smiled at figures David wasn't expecting the talk to flow so well while they ate. Nathan's lessons, his favorite books, and his plans were talked about. After graduation, David told Nathan funny stories from his own college years, which made Nathan feel like he had won in small ways. But when they were done with dessert, Nathan leaned back in his chair and gave David a serious look. He asked, "So what now?" David put down his fork because he knew what Nathan meant. "That's up to you," he said openly. "I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for." Nathan nodded and looked down at his plate for a moment before saying, "I don't know how to do this father-son thing. I mean, I never really had a dad. It was just my mom and me." David forced back a lump in his throat. "We don't have to rush anything. We can just be in each other's lives in any way that feels right." Nathan breathed out, "I think I'd like that." David smiled as he felt calmer. Nathan also took another look around the flat. "My dad always made me wonder if he was a bad person or if he just didn't care." He turned back to David and said, "You're not what I expected." Dave thought for a moment. "What did you expect?" Nathan smiled, "Some old, rich guy who doesn't say anything." David laughed. "I'm rich, but I like to think I have some character," he said. Nathan laughed. "Okay, that's fine." The love message wasn't very big, but it was something, and for now that was enough. Before you go to the next video, please like and share our channel with your friends. David was getting used to a new pace in his life that included Nathan in ways he had never thought possible just a few months before. Their get-togethers were happening more often now, going from coffee dates to dinners, walks through Central Park, and even a few Knicks games each time they talked. The invisible wall that had been between them came down a little more. Even though there were still times when David wasn't sure what to do, he could feel their link growing stronger. He loved every moment he spent with Nathan, even though it was strange to become a father so late in the game. But there was always a fear in the back of his mind that Nathan would run away again if he made one mistake. Because he didn't want to push too hard or ask for too much, he went at Nathan's pace. One night, as they sat in a small diner near Nathan's campus, Nathan said something unexpected. "I've been thinking about going to Chicago," he said while stirring his milkshake without meaning to. David looked up from his plate and asked, "Oh, is there a reason?" Nathan thought for a moment and then said, "I want to go see my mom's grave." His voice was calm, but there was stress in it that hadn't been there since the funeral. I feel like it's time," he said. David felt sad when Olivia's name came up. He had been trying to build something with Nathan for so long that he hadn't thought about how much his son might still be hurting. "That's a good thought," Mr. David said softly. Nathan looked at David and was shocked that he would do that. David nodded and said, "Of course, if you'd rather go alone, I understand. But if you want company, I'd be honored to go with you." Nathan was quiet for a moment and then gave a small nod. "I believe I would enjoy that." The next few days, they flew to Chicago, a place with a lot of history for Nathan, but not much for David. They were both thinking about their own things on the quiet flight. When they got there, Nathan showed David where Olivia's grave was. They walked through the rows of gravestones until they reached hers. The air was cool and the sky was cloudy. Nathan put his hands in his pockets and stood in front of the grave, looking at the letters that read his mother's name. "Hey, Mom," he whispered. David took a step back to give Nathan some time to himself. He then watched as his son got on his knees and traced his fingers over the writing. "I'm doing okay," Nathan spoke softly. "Your worry about me was great, but I'm getting along fine in college. I met my dad and made some friends." His voice was a little shaky. "At first, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but he's not what I thought he would be. He's trying, Mom, and I think that's fine with you." David's heart sank when he heard those words. He felt guilty for a long time because he wasn't there for Olivia. He didn't know about Nathan, and he missed so much. Nathan's words that Olivia would have been fine with him being in Nathan's life made me feel a little better. After a while, Nathan stood up and let out a big breath. He then turned to David with a softer look on his face than before. "Thanks for coming with me." David put his hand on his shoulder. They walked away from the cemetery in silence, but it wasn't a tense silence. It was the kind of silence that meant they understood each other. Nathan smiled at David as they got into the car. "Are you hungry? My mom used to take me to this pizza place when I was a kid. It has the best deep dish in the city," David smiled. "Sounds great." As they drove through Chicago, they could tell something was off. It wasn't just the place or the time, it was them when they used to be so far apart. The walls were barely standing. And for the first time, David felt like he really had his son in his life. Before you go to the next video, please subscribe to our channel. Share and like with your friends. David had no idea that his life would change so much. He was a self-made millionaire who thought he had everything he needed. The last few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, from finding out he had a son he had never met. But now, as he sat in his office with a view of the New York skyline, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. Nathan was an important part of his life, and even though they had a rough start, they had built something real. It wasn't about making up for lost time anymore. It was about going forward together. In a way that neither of them had expected, the trip to Chicago had changed something about their relationship and made it stronger. David was afraid that going back to Olivia's grave would bring up old hurts, but it healed them both. Nathan had finally let go of some of the pain he had been carrying. By doing this, he made room in his life for David. Nathan had just finished his semester, and David had asked him to dinner at his Manhattan apartment. Every time Nathan came over, they would cook together, or at least try to, since neither of them was very good in the kitchen, and they would talk about everything from sports to business to Nathan's plans for the future. That night, Nathan cut up veggies and David stirred pasta sauce in a pot. Nathan looked at him serious and said, "I've been thinking," which David took as a surprise. "I want to intern at your company this summer," he asked Nathan, trying not to sound too excited. He wanted Nathan to be interested in his business, but he didn't want to force him to do anything. Nathan agreed. I'm studying business, and it makes sense to get real-world experience. Also, I want to get a better look at what you do." David put down the spoon and looked at his son. "That's a good idea, but just so you know, you'll have to work just as hard as everyone else," he said. "Not any extra treatment," Nathan laughed and said. "I didn't expect anything less." That night's dinner felt different and lighter, like they had finally reached a point in their relationship where the past wasn't getting in the way. They laughed and told stories, and David felt like he wasn't just making up for lost time, he was actually being a dad. Nathan began his job at David's company a few weeks later. People in the company first talked about the CEO's son working with them, but Nathan quickly showed that he wasn't just there to make an appearance. He got there early, stayed late, and asked good questions. Not only did he want to learn from David, but also from everyone else. David was so proud of his son one night. After a long day at work, Nathan knocked on David's door and asked, "Got a minute?" David told him to sit down and asked, "What's on your mind?" Nathan thought for a moment before speaking. "I know things didn't go the way they were supposed to between us. I grew up thinking I didn't have a dad, and then you showed up. At first I didn't like it, I didn't like you. But now I'm glad I found you," he said. "Or maybe I'm glad you found me." David's throat got tight. He felt bad for not being there for Nathan's childhood, but hearing those words made him understand that the present was what really mattered. "I'm glad too," he said in a steady voice. "I missed the first 18 years, but I'm here now and I'm not leaving." Nathan smiled a little. "That's good, because I think I might like having you around." David laughed and said, "Well, that's good." David's best summer ever. He worked with them, went to baseball games on the weekends, and even took a quick trip to California just because. Nathan was no longer a stranger, he was now family. David felt like his life was complete for the first time in a long time. Years later, when Nathan graduated and started working full-time for David, he knew he had earned a son and a legacy. Nathan was more than just a person. He was his main goal and proof that life can give you a second shot when you least expect it. David was determined not to waste any time this time. You liked this story? Please join our group.